And he goes, let's leave the warthog out for another night. Let's let some more animals come in and hit that. And let's go sit the impala where we've got other predators coming into that. So that evening found us tucking into one of his blinds at the waterhole.
Florida made a decision so insane, the entire world thought they'd lost their minds. The Everglades were being destroyed by pythons that had slaughtered 99% of all mammals. Nothing worked. Scientists were baffled, hunters defeated. Then they did the unthinkable. They released hundreds of honey badgers, the most vicious predators on Earth.
I couldn't be more excited, so I rushed out to take a look at my first African honey badger.
There's the shot, right in the crease of the shoulder. And look at what a cool animal this is. It looks so much like our badgers at home, but differently colored. Look at the teeth.
Everyone laughed and called them crazy. But then the pythons started vanishing. Entire populations gone overnight. Empty traps everywhere. Strange creatures spotted in the darkness. Eerie sounds no one can identify. What's actually happening in those swamps will absolutely blow your mind. The truth behind this experiment is more shocking than anyone could have imagined. During the 1,970 seconds, owning exotic pets became increasingly popular across the United States. Among the most sought after were Burmese pythons, large constrictor snakes native to Southeast Asia. With their distinctive patterned scales and relatively calm demeanor when young, these reptiles quickly became status symbols. Pet stores marketed them as manageable alternatives to traditional pets, and many people purchased them without fully understanding what they were getting into. A baby Burmese python might fit comfortably in your hands, but these animals don't stay small for long. In their natural habitat across Myanmar, Thailand, and surrounding regions, Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species in the world. Adults commonly reach lengths of 12 to 16 feet, though some individuals can grow even larger. They're powerful constrictors, capable of subduing prey much larger than themselves. In the wild, their diet consists of mammals, birds, and occasionally other reptiles. They're patient hunters, sometimes waiting motionless for hours before striking with remarkable speed. For new pet owners in Florida, the reality of caring for such an animal often didn't match their expectations. As these snakes grew, they required larger enclosures, more food, and careful handling. A snake that seemed manageable at 3 feet became a genuine challenge at 10 feet, and nearly impossible at 15. Feeding a full-grown python meant providing rabbits or chickens, a reality that many owners found difficult or expensive to maintain. The novelty wore off quickly, and people faced a difficult decision about what to do with an animal they could no longer care for. Some owners tried to find new homes for their pythons through pet shops or reptile enthusiasts. Others simply gave up and made a choice that would have far-reaching consequences. They released their pets into the wild, assuming nature would somehow take care of the problem. Many chose the Everglades, thinking the vast wilderness would absorb a few escaped snakes without issue. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first documented sightings of Burmese pythons in the Everglades began appearing in the early 1980 seconds. Park rangers and wildlife officials initially treated these as isolated incidents. A large snake spotted near a trail or found by a fisherman didn't seem like cause for alarm. Florida already had native snake species, including some fairly large ones, so a few escaped pets didn't trigger immediate concern. The prevailing assumption was that these tropical snakes, adapted to the jungles of Southeast Asia, wouldn't survive Florida's seasonal temperature variations or establish breeding populations. That assumption proved catastrophically incorrect. The climate of southern Florida, particularly in the Everglades, turned out to be remarkably similar to the python's native habitat. Warm temperatures, high humidity, abundant water sources, and dense vegetation provided everything these snakes needed to thrive. Even better for the pythons, they found themselves in an environment with no natural predators capable of threatening an adult snake. In their native range, pythons face competition from other large predators and must navigate complex ecosystems where they're not always at the top of the food chain. In Florida, they had no such constraints. The situation escalated dramatically in August 1992, when Hurricane Andrew slammed into southern Florida as a Category 5 storm. The hurricane caused massive destruction across the region, with wind speeds exceeding 160 miles per hour. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, and infrastructure was devastated. Among the facilities damaged were several exotic animal breeding operations and private collections. In the chaos of the storm, enclosures were destroyed, and an unknown number of Burmese pythons escaped into the surrounding environment. Some estimates suggest hundreds of snakes were released during this single event, though exact numbers remain unknown. These newly liberated pythons found the Everglades to be an ideal sanctuary. The warm, wet environment suited them perfectly, and food was extraordinarily abundant. The ecosystem was rich with prey species that had evolved without any defense mechanisms against large constrictor snakes. Raccoons, opossums, rabbits, and various bird species had no innate fear of pythons and no evolutionary strategies for avoiding them. For the snakes, it was like arriving in paradise. Burmese pythons are also remarkably efficient breeders. A single female can lay between 20 and 100 eggs in a clutch, and in the favorable conditions of the Everglades, survival rates for hatchlings were unusually high. Without natural predators to control their numbers, the population began growing exponentially. Each generation produced more snakes, and those snakes spread throughout the wetlands, following waterways and moving through the dense vegetation that made them nearly impossible to track. By the early 2000s, scientists began to realize the scope of the problem. Estimates suggested there could be tens of thousands of pythons in the Everglades, though some researchers believed the actual number was much higher. The snakes had established themselves throughout the ecosystem, and their impact was becoming impossible to ignore. What concerned experts most wasn't just the presence of the snakes, but what was happening to the native wildlife. A comprehensive study conducted by the United States Geological Survey revealed shocking findings. Researchers compared wildlife survey data from before the python invasion with current observations. The results painted a grim picture. Raccoon populations in some areas had declined by approximately 99%. Opossum numbers had dropped by a similar margin. Bobcats, once common throughout the region, had nearly vanished from areas with high python populations. Even white-tailed deer, animals considerably larger than the snakes themselves, were being found in python stomachs. The impact extended beyond mammals. Wading birds, which rely on the wetlands for feeding and nesting, saw their populations decline as pythons consumed eggs, chicks, and adult birds alike. The snakes proved to be generalist predators, eating virtually anything they could overpower. Researchers documented pythons consuming alligators, in some cases snakes, and alligators of nearly equal size locked in fatal confrontations. The ecological balance that had existed for thousands of years was collapsing. Perhaps most unsettling was the silence that descended over affected areas. Wildlife biologists who had worked in the Everglades for decades noticed the change. Areas that once echoed with animal calls grew quiet. The rustle of small mammals moving through underbrush, the chatter of raccoons at night, the various sounds of a thriving ecosystem all diminished. Some sections of the wetlands took on an eerie stillness, populated primarily by the very snakes that had driven other species to near extinction. The situation represented more than just the loss of individual species. The Everglades is a complex ecosystem, where each species plays a role in maintaining overall health. Removing key predators and prey species creates cascading effects throughout the food web. Plants that relied on certain animals for seed dispersal might decline. Species that depended on those plants would then struggle. The entire system was being fundamentally altered by the presence of a single invasive species, and the changes were happening faster than anyone had anticipated. As the full extent of the python invasion became clear, Florida officials recognized they were facing an ecological crisis, unlike anything the state had encountered before. The situation demanded immediate action, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission began mobilizing resources to combat the invasion. The initial approach seemed straightforward enough. If the problem was too many pythons, the solution would be to remove as many snakes as possible from the wild. The commission established programs to hire professional hunters and wildlife specialists, offering financial incentives for python captures. These weren't casual hobbyists, but experienced outdoorsmen who understood the Everglades and knew how to track large reptiles. They worked day and night, wading through swamps, searching canal banks, and investigating any location where pythons might hide. The work was exhausting and often dangerous, requiring hunters to capture snakes that could exceed 15 feet in length and weigh over 150 pounds. To generate public interest and increase removal efforts, officials created the Python Challenge, an organized event that invited both professional hunters and enthusiastic amateurs to participate in removing pythons from the Everglades. The competitions drew substantial attention, with participants coming from across the country. Armed with snake hooks, flashlights, and determination, hundreds of people combed through the wetlands during each challenge. The event succeeded in removing hundreds of snakes, and the python hunts became something of a spectacle, drawing media coverage and public fascination. Yet despite these efforts, the results were discouraging. For every python captured, countless others remained hidden in the vast wilderness. The Everglades spans roughly 1.5 million acres of wetlands, sawgrass, marshes, and mangrove forests. Much of this terrain is inaccessible by vehicle, and difficult even on foot. Pythons are masters of concealment, often spending days submerged in water or hidden in dense vegetation. Finding them required not just skill, but extraordinary luck. Recognizing that traditional hunting methods weren't sufficient, researchers turned to technology. Scientists began deploying drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras to scan the landscape from above. The idea was that the snake's body heat would show up as distinct signatures, making them easier to locate. While the technology showed promise, it had significant limitations. Dense canopy cover blocked the camera's view, and the warm Florida climate meant thermal imaging often picked up numerous heat sources that weren't pythons. Another innovative approach involved radio telemetry and the use of what researchers called scout snakes. Wildlife biologists would capture male pythons and surgically implant radio transmitters before releasing them back into the wild. During breeding season, these males would seek out females, potentially leading researchers to breeding aggregations where multiple snakes gathered. The strategy worked to some extent, allowing teams to locate and remove breeding females who each represented dozens of potential offspring. However, the approach required significant resources and could only target a fraction of the population. Environmental DNA testing offered yet another tool. Scientists collected water samples from various locations throughout the Everglades and analyzed them for trace genetic material shared by pythons. The presence of python DNA in water samples could indicate snake activity in areas where visual surveys had found nothing. While useful for mapping the extent of the invasion, the technique didn't help with actually removing individual animals. Despite deploying these various strategies and investing millions of dollars annually, the fundamental problem remained. The python population continued to grow. Researchers estimated removal efforts were capturing only a small percentage of the total population, nowhere near enough to make a meaningful dent in their numbers. The Everglades was simply too large, too wild, and too difficult to monitor comprehensively. The pythons had every advantage. By the mid-2010 seconds, a sobering reality began to set in among scientists and wildlife managers. Researchers at the University of Florida published analyses suggesting that complete eradication of Burmese pythons from the Everglades was effectively impossible with current methods and resources. The snakes had become too well established, their population too large, and their habitat too vast. The goal quietly shifted from elimination to containment. Officials focused on preventing pythons from spreading beyond the Everglades into other parts of Florida and neighboring states, while continuing removal efforts to suppress population numbers where possible. This shift in strategy represented a difficult admission. Florida wasn't going to win this war in any traditional sense. The best outcome now was managing an ongoing problem rather than solving it entirely. The Burmese python had become a permanent part of Florida's ecosystem, an invasive species that would require constant vigilance and control efforts for the foreseeable future. Around this same time, an unusual idea began circulating on social media and wildlife forums. People frustrated with the lack of progress started asking a provocative question. If human efforts weren't enough to control the pythons, what about using another animal to do the job? The conversation often turned to one creature in particular, the honey badger. Native to Africa and parts of Asia, honey badgers had developed a reputation as one of nature's most fearless animals. Wildlife documentaries and viral videos showcased their remarkable boldness. Footage showed honey badgers confronting lions, raiding beehives despite being stung repeatedly, and engaging in fierce battles with venomous snakes, including cobras. They possessed thick skin that provided some protection against snake bites and bee stings, and they seemed utterly undeterred by threats that would send other animals fleeing. The honey badger's ferocious reputation made it an internet sensation. People shared videos with captions like "Honey badger doesn't care," and the animal became a symbol of fearless determination. So when discussions about Florida's python problem reached a fever pitch, someone inevitably suggested the honey badger as a solution. The idea spread rapidly. If these small but aggressive predators could stand up to African cobras, why not Burmese pythons? What started as jokes and memes gradually took on a life of its own. Online forums dedicated to wildlife management saw increasingly serious discussions about the feasibility of introducing honey badgers to Florida. People debated how many would be needed, where they should be released, and whether they could actually make a difference against the python population. The concept even acquired an unofficial name that spread across social media platforms: Operation Honey Badger. Scientists, however, were far less enthusiastic. Ecologists and wildlife biologists quickly pointed out numerous problems with the idea. Honey badgers are not native to the Americas. They evolved in African savannas and Asian scrublands, environments vastly different from Florida's subtropical wetlands. There was no guarantee they could even survive in the Everglades, much less thrive there. The region's humidity, vegetation, and prey base were nothing like their natural habitat. More concerning was the historical precedent of introducing non-native predators to control pest species. Such attempts have a troubling track record of failure and unintended consequences. One of the most notorious examples occurred in Australia during the 1932. Sugarcane farmers facing beetle infestations imported cane toads from Hawaii, believing the amphibians would consume the agricultural pests. Instead, the toads largely ignored the beetles and began reproducing explosively. Making matters worse, cane toads possess toxic skin secretions that proved lethal to native predators. Snakes, lizards, crocodiles, and other animals that attempted to eat the toads died from the poison. Today, Australia has over 2 billion cane toads spread across large portions of the continent, and they remain an ongoing ecological disaster. Similar problems occurred in Hawaii and various Caribbean islands, where farmers introduced mongooses to control rat populations in sugarcane fields. The plan seemed logical since mongooses are known to hunt rodents effectively. However, planners overlooked a crucial detail. Rats are primarily nocturnal, active at night, while mongooses hunt during the day. The two species rarely encountered each other. Instead of controlling rats, the mongooses turned their attention to native ground-nesting birds and reptiles, many of which had no defenses against this new predator. Several bird species were driven to extinction or near extinction as a result. These cautionary tales illustrated a fundamental principle in ecology. Introducing a new species to solve a problem caused by another introduced species often makes things worse rather than better. Ecosystems are complex, and predicting how a new animal will behave in an unfamiliar environment is extremely difficult. Even well-intentioned interventions can spiral into disasters that take decades or centuries to address. Biologists reviewing the honey badger proposal identified specific concerns. Despite their reputation for fighting snakes, honey badgers don't primarily hunt large constrictors. Their diet consists mainly of small mammals, birds, insects, and occasionally smaller reptiles. A honey badger might defend itself against a python if cornered, but there was little reason to believe they would actively seek out and kill adult pythons as a primary food source. Furthermore, honey badgers are solitary and highly territorial. They wouldn't form hunting groups or coordinate efforts to target pythons. Each individual would claim and defend its own territory, likely ignoring other honey badgers and focusing on easier prey. There was also the matter of containment. Honey badgers are notorious escape artists, famous in zoo settings for their ability to unlock enclosures, dig under barriers, and manipulate objects to create escape routes. Releasing them into the open environment of the Everglades would make any kind of management or control virtually impossible. If they adapted successfully to Florida, they could easily become another invasive species, preying on native wildlife and potentially spreading beyond the Everglades into suburban and agricultural areas. Despite these serious objections from the scientific community, public interest in the idea continued growing. Part of the appeal was pure frustration. After years of failed efforts and millions of dollars spent with little to show for it, people wanted something dramatic, a bold solution that matched the scale of the problem. The honey badger represented that kind of dramatic action, even if it was completely impractical. Yet, state officials remained silent on the subject. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission declined to comment on what they termed speculative proposals. They issued no official statements confirming or denying any plans involving honey badgers. To some observers, this silence seemed suspicious. Why not simply state that no such program existed or was being considered? The lack of clear denial allowed speculation to flourish, and rumors began circulating that perhaps something was happening behind the scenes after all. As online speculation about honey badgers continued to swirl, something unexpected began happening in the Everglades. The change was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as random variation or coincidence, but over time, the pattern became too consistent to ignore. People who spent their days and nights in the swamps started noticing differences in python activity, differences that didn't match any previous trends. Professional python hunters were among the first to pick up on the shift. These individuals had spent years developing expertise in locating and capturing the snakes. They knew the python's habits, their preferred hiding spots, and the telltale signs of their presence. During the late 2010 seconds and early 2020 seconds, several experienced hunters reported that their usual techniques weren't producing the same results. Areas that had reliably yielded multiple captures per night were suddenly coming up empty. Traps that once caught snakes with regularity sat undisturbed. Initially, hunters attributed this to the snakes becoming more wary. After years of intensive removal efforts, it seemed logical that pythons might learn to avoid areas with heavy human activity or become more cautious about the situations they entered. Wildlife can adapt to human hunting pressure over time, altering their behavior to reduce exposure to threats. However, the pattern seemed broader than simple learned avoidance. The decline in sightings occurred across multiple regions simultaneously, including areas with minimal hunting pressure. In early 2022, data from the United States Geological Survey revealed something unusual in their python monitoring statistics. Survey teams conducting standardized counts in specific sections of the southern Everglades documented a 15% decrease in python observations compared to the previous year. For most wildlife populations, a 15% annual fluctuation might not be remarkable. Animal numbers naturally rise and fall based on various environmental factors, including weather patterns, food availability, and disease. But for Burmese pythons in Florida, any downward trend was unprecedented. Since systematic monitoring began, every survey and study had shown python populations either stable or increasing. The species had demonstrated remarkable success in colonizing the Everglades, with population models consistently predicting continued growth. A sudden reversal of this trend, even a modest one, demanded explanation. Scientists examined various possibilities. Perhaps an unusually cold winter had impacted snake activity levels, making them less visible during surveys, even if total population numbers remained stable. Perhaps changes in water levels throughout the wetlands had altered python distribution, concentrating them in areas that surveys hadn't adequately covered. Yet, these explanations didn't fully satisfy researchers familiar with the data. The decline appeared consistent across different habitat types and wasn't correlated with obvious environmental variables. Temperature and rainfall patterns for that year fell within normal ranges. Prey species populations showed no dramatic changes that might explain reduced python numbers. Month after month, monitoring teams continued reporting fewer encounters with the snakes, and the pattern gradually spread to include additional survey zones. Field researchers began documenting other unusual observations. Some reported finding python shed skins in locations that suggested the snakes had moved through an area but then vanished without the usual signs of continued presence. Experienced trackers mentioned that trails seemed to end abruptly rather than leading to den sites or areas where snakes typically rest. A few hunters discovered python carcasses in the field, but the condition of these remains raised questions. The bodies showed signs of trauma inconsistent with typical causes of snake mortality, like vehicle strikes or predation by known Everglades animals. Wildlife biologists examining some of these carcasses noted clean, precise wounds that didn't match the feeding patterns of alligators, the only native predator large enough to potentially threaten an adult python. The damage appeared more consistent with powerful claws or teeth from a mammalian predator. Yet Florida had no native mammals capable of tackling a large python. Black bears inhabited some parts of Florida, but rarely ventured into the deep wetlands where these carcasses were found. And bear predation on snakes is uncommon. Florida panthers, the state's largest native cat, existed in small numbers but also weren't known for hunting large constrictors. As word of these findings spread through informal networks of hunters, researchers, and wildlife enthusiasts, speculation intensified. The old jokes about releasing honey badgers resurfaced, but now with a different tone. Instead of mocking the idea, people began asking whether someone might have actually done it. Had a private organization or even state officials secretly introduced honey badgers or some other exotic predator to combat the python invasion? The notion seemed far-fetched, yet it gained traction partly because no conventional explanation adequately accounted for the observed changes. Government agencies continued maintaining their standard position, neither confirming nor denying any unconventional programs. This official silence, which might have been intended to avoid legitimizing absurd rumors, instead had the opposite effect. In the absence of clear information, people filled the void with their own theories. During this period, various pieces of supposed evidence began circulating online. Someone posted photographs of transport crates allegedly spotted near an Everglades access point, claiming they were labeled for exotic species. The images were too blurry to confirm details, and the location couldn't be verified. Another person shared drone footage showing what they insisted was an unusual animal moving quickly across an elevated levee in a remote section of the wetlands. Analysis of the footage proved inconclusive, with skeptics arguing it showed nothing more than a raccoon or bobcat at an odd angle. Park rangers and wildlife officers working in the Everglades began hearing stories from regular visitors and local residents. Fishermen mentioned hearing strange vocalizations at night, guttural sounds that didn't match any familiar animal. Airboat operators claimed to have glimpsed dark shapes moving through sawgrass in ways that seemed wrong for the native wildlife they knew well. Some reported brief sightings of animals they couldn't identify, always at a distance, and always too quick to photograph clearly. These accounts remained anecdotal and unverified, the kind of stories that spread in any wild area where people spend time outdoors. Swamps and wetlands have always generated folklore about mysterious creatures and unexplained phenomena. Under normal circumstances, such tales would be dismissed as misidentifications, shadows, or imagination. But in the context of declining python numbers and the ongoing speculation about honey badgers, even dubious reports received serious attention from some quarters. By mid-2023, the annual Python Challenge yielded surprising results. Despite record participation numbers, with more hunters than ever before searching the wetlands, the total number of pythons captured dropped below 600. Previous challenges had regularly exceeded 800 captures, and some years had approached 1,000. Organizers initially struggled to explain the decrease. Were the snakes becoming more elusive? Had they moved into areas where hunters couldn't easily access them? Or was the overall population actually declining? State wildlife officials offered measured statements, suggesting that intensive removal efforts over many years were finally showing cumulative effects. They pointed to improved hunting techniques, better training for participants, and more sophisticated tracking methods, as evidence that control programs were working. This represented good news from a conservation perspective, proof that persistent effort could make a difference even against a well-established invasive species. However, some biologists involved in the research expressed private doubts about this explanation. Off the record, a few admitted that the rate of decline seemed too rapid to be explained solely by human removal efforts. Mathematical models of python population dynamics suggested that current capture rates, while helpful, shouldn't produce such noticeable decreases in such a short time frame. The species bred too prolifically and matured too quickly for the level of hunting pressure being applied to cause significant population reduction within just a few years. Adding to the mystery, several pythons that had been fitted with radio transmitters as part of ongoing research simply stopped moving. Biologists would track a snake to a location, only to find the transmitter abandoned or, in some cases, discover nothing at all. The signals simply disappeared, as if the snakes had been removed from the ecosystem entirely. Equipment failure could explain some instances, but the frequency of lost signals exceeded normal expectations for transmitter malfunction. Local communities surrounding the Everglades developed their own consensus about what was happening, a consensus that often differed from official explanations. In towns like Homestead, Florida City, and smaller settlements near the wetlands, residents who had lived with the python problem for years noticed the changes. Farmers who had regularly encountered snakes on their properties reported months without sightings. People who had worried about pythons near their homes felt safer. The K swamps, they said, felt different now, quieter in some ways but also more balanced. Stories circulated about strange discoveries in the wetlands. A hunting guide claimed to have found a python nest that had been torn apart, the eggs destroyed but not eaten, as if something had attacked the site deliberately to prevent the snakes from reproducing. Another resident near the Big Cypress National Preserve reported hearing what sounded like a violent struggle in the darkness, complete with hissing and aggressive vocalizations. When he investigated the area the following morning, he found disturbed vegetation and what appeared to be blood in the grass, but no bodies or clear evidence of what had occurred. Wildlife photographers attempting to document pythons for conservation organizations found their work becoming increasingly difficult. Locations that had been reliable for snake photography a few years earlier now yielded few opportunities. Camera traps set up to monitor wildlife activity captured images of various native species, but far fewer pythons than expected based on previous monitoring efforts. Some photographers half-jokingly began referring to the pythons as ghosts, there in theory but rarely seen in practice. Throughout all of this, a phrase began appearing with increasing frequency in online discussions, social media posts, and even graffiti around South Florida. Two simple words that captured the mood of mystery and speculation surrounding the changing situation in the Everglades. People started saying it's done, a cryptic statement that could mean many things, but seemed to suggest that some decisive action had been taken, some intervention that was now producing results, whether officials acknowledged it or not. The phrase appeared on bumper stickers and t-shirts. Local businesses near the Everglades adopted it as an unofficial slogan. It represented a collective sense that something significant had shifted, that the python crisis that had defined the region for decades was entering a new phase. Whether through human intervention, natural processes, or something stranger, the balance in the Everglades seemed to be changing, and people wanted to believe that change was for the better. The mystery surrounding the Everglades situation quickly escaped the boundaries of South Florida and spread across the country. Wildlife forums and conservation websites became filled with discussions, analyzing every scrap of information available. Amateur researchers compiled reports from various sources, creating timelines and maps that attempted to track the declining python sightings. Photography enthusiasts shared their blurry images and ambiguous footage, each new post generating hundreds of comments debating what the images actually showed. Social media platforms amplified the speculation exponentially. Video clips that supposedly captured unusual animal sounds in the wetlands went viral, accumulating millions of views within days. Audio experts and wildlife biologists weighed in on these recordings, with opinions ranging from confident identification of known animals to admissions that the sounds didn't match anything in their experience. Some clips were obvious hoaxes or misidentifications, but others remained genuinely puzzling, fueling continued speculation about what might be living in the swamps. Documentary filmmakers and wildlife television producers took notice of the story. Production companies reached out to Florida wildlife officials requesting permits to film in areas where python numbers had reportedly declined. They wanted to investigate the phenomenon firsthand and potentially capture evidence of whatever was affecting the snake population. Some proposals specifically mentioned plans to search for evidence of introduced predators, though officials typically denied these requests or imposed restrictions that made such filming impractical. Late in 2023, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission released an official report on python management efforts. The document confirmed what hunters and field researchers had been reporting for months. Python captures in key zones of the Everglades had decreased by more than 20% compared to previous years. Even more significantly, captures of breeding females, which are crucial targets for population control, since each female can produce dozens of offspring, had declined sharply. The report attributed these positive trends to several factors, including improved hunter training, better coordination between removal teams, and technological advances in locating snakes. Officials presented the data as validation of their long-term management strategy, evidence that persistent effort was finally producing measurable results. However, field officers and researchers involved in the actual removal work offered a more complex picture. One wildlife officer, speaking informally with a local newspaper reporter, mentioned discovering multiple python nests that had been destroyed by unknown means. The nests weren't in areas where official removal teams had been operating, and the damage didn't match human methodology. Skeptics maintained that the entire phenomenon could be explained through conventional means without invoking hidden predators or secret programs. They argued that python populations might naturally fluctuate based on complex factors, including prey availability, disease, weather patterns, and density-dependent effects, where overcrowding leads to increased competition and mortality. These explanations certainly had merit from a scientific perspective. Wildlife populations do exhibit natural variability, and invasive species can show boom and bust cycles as they colonize new environments. Yet for many people living near the wetlands, these academic explanations felt insufficient. Local residents had intimate familiarity with the Everglades ecosystem, built through years or even generations of living adjacent to the wilderness. They trusted their observations and experiences, and those experiences increasingly included encounters with things that didn't fit their understanding of the region's wildlife. The footprints they found near canals, the sounds they heard at night, the fleeting glimpses of movement that seemed wrong somehow. These accumulated experiences created a collective certainty that something had changed beyond what official reports acknowledged. Stories from longtime Everglades guides gained considerable attention when posted on wildlife forums. These experienced professionals, who had spent decades working in the wetlands, reported encounters they couldn't explain using their extensive knowledge of native wildlife. These accounts resonated with people far beyond Florida's borders. They tapped into something deeper than just curiosity about wildlife management or invasive species control. The narrative that developed around the Everglades mystery combined elements of environmental justice, natural retribution, and hope that ecosystems possessed resilience beyond human understanding. This sentiment found expression in a new slogan that appeared throughout South Florida and eventually spread nationally through social media and merchandise. The phrase was simple and direct: "Whatever is eating the snakes, let it." Bumper stickers and t-shirts bearing these words became common sights around communities near the Everglades. The slogan perfectly captured a widespread attitude of exhausted pragmatism mixed with hope. It reflected a fundamental shift in how people thought about ecological management and human intervention in natural systems. For years, the approach had been to rely on human expertise, technology, and effort to solve the python crisis. Millions of dollars had been invested in removal programs, research initiatives, and public awareness campaigns. While these efforts had value and prevented the situation from becoming even worse, they hadn't solved the fundamental problem. Now, whether through deliberate introduction of an exotic predator, natural colonization by some previously unknown species, or simply ecological processes that humans didn't fully understand, something appeared to be reducing python numbers more effectively than human efforts had managed. Environmental management agencies found themselves in an awkward position. They couldn't officially acknowledge the existence of any introduced predator species without facing serious questions about authorization, oversight, and environmental impact assessments. Yet completely denying that anything unusual was happening became increasingly difficult as evidence accumulated and public interest intensified. This disconnect between official narrative and popular understanding created a strange dynamic where everyone acknowledged the declining python numbers but disagreed fundamentally about why it was happening. For the Everglades itself, the changes continued regardless of human debate about their cause. Areas that had been eerily silent for years began showing signs of ecological recovery. Some field biologists reported observing small mammals in locations where they had been absent for over a decade. Bird populations in certain zones appeared to stabilize or even increase slightly. These positive indicators remained preliminary and localized, but they offered hope that perhaps the worst damage to the ecosystem might be reversing. The story of the Everglades python invasion and its mysterious decline ultimately raised profound questions about humanity's relationship with nature and our ability to manage complex ecological systems. It demonstrated both the severe consequences of introducing non-native species and the limitations of our capacity to undo such mistakes once they've been made. Whether the python decline resulted from human intervention, natural processes, or some combination of both, it suggested that ecosystems possess dynamics and resilience that science doesn't yet fully comprehend. Perhaps the most important lesson was about humility in the face of ecological complexity. A reminder that nature operates according to rules far more intricate than our simplified models can capture.